Today we'll be building this mystical divination room, complete with magical blue runes, spiral engravings, and a brass door. How are you today? Art Jeremiah here, and I'm back with another video about building a dungeon. If you want regular inspiration, then hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and now we can get right into the video. The very first thing I did was draw out an 8x4 inch grid on a piece of 1/2 inch XPS foam. For this, I'm using a 1.4mm ballpoint pen, so I get a nice thick looking engraved grid. This is supposed to be a magical room, so I figured that if I incorporated runes into the tiles, that would help give me that sort of feel. So using that same pen, I engraved a variety of runes into the tiles that would show the most. I had no reference for these symbols, I just sort of made it up as I went along. That said, I think they turned out pretty good. And then I carved a brickwork pattern into all the remaining pieces that I knew would not be covered by the wall. After that, I used a ball of aluminum foil to texture the tiles with the runes, and my piece of road asphalt to texture the brickwork. I just used two different textures to show a little more variety and separation from the two styles of tiles. I decided that I wanted to give more definition to the rune tiles, so I used a permanent marker to accomplish this. The permanent marker slightly melts the foam and helps give a much deeper impression. After that, I took my ultra fine point Sharpie and added a bunch of cracks to the tiles that have the runes on them. I did a lot more of these cracks than I normally would on my builds. I don't know, maybe I just got a little bit into it, but it turned out pretty good. I wanted the walls of this room to be more smooth than the other areas in the dungeon so far, so I'm cutting directly out of a piece of 2-inch foam. In order to accomplish this task, I first cut out a piece of foam that was roughly the size of the room. That was just to make it easier to work with. Then, using my framing square, I measure the walls out of 2-inch foam. Take note, I made sure to pay attention to where my doorways to the room will be. I then take the piece of foam to my Proxxon hot wire cutter and start cutting out the walls. Pay attention to how I'm leaving a few millimeters around the outer edges of the walls. We will be cutting them flush later. Because the rest of the dungeon walls are not 2 inches tall, I cut the wall sections down to the height of the rest of the dungeon walls simply by comparing with the previous tile and marking it to the right height. I did this part right before I cut the inner sections of the walls, just so that they would be more stable and less flimsy. After that, I work on cutting the inner parts of the walls. This part gets a little tricky because I want the walls to have a smooth look. It was almost impossible to cut the walls completely smooth with the level of heat that I was using. It would have been a lot better to lower the temperature, but I was distracted and in a hurry because I had some Etsy orders that I really wanted to get shipped out that night. Since I didn't get as smooth of a look as I was going for, I used a sanding sponge to smooth out all of the surfaces that I wanted smooth. I use these all the time when working with foam. Just make sure to wear a mask so you don't breathe in harmful particles. If you shop on Amazon and are interested in picking up some of the supplies I use, then check out my description for my hand-picked links. I earn a very small commission from you purchasing from these links, but any little bit of support that you can offer is very much appreciated. I have this template sitting around that I regularly use for my builds. It's made out of a plastic stencil blank and it's been very useful. I actually did a video where I traced a Warhammer 40k Aquila, so if you're interested in seeing how to make your own, then go ahead and watch that video. I should have a link on the screen right now, as well as in the description. Anyway, using my stencil and ballpoint pen, I traced these spiral designs onto the walls, making sure to alternate the pattern for a bit of variety. Then I give the designs that engraved look by using my pen to make deeper grooves in the spirals. I could have left the walls like this, but I decided I wanted to give them more detail. So in order to achieve this, I engraved a row of bricks on top and bottom of both the wall sections. Then I noticed I was a little bit uncentered with the spiral designs, so I gave everything a more even look by adding a simple line in between the spirals and the bricks, just where I had the extra space. I then texture the walls with a piece of aluminum foil. I only lightly do this as I just want the walls to appear pretty smooth but still have that stone-like finish, just more of a smooth stone. Then I hot glue the walls to the floor. This is a pretty simple step, but do remember to hold the wall in place for a few seconds so it does not separate from the floor in any sections. After the hot glue cools, which is obviously fast to cool, I go back to my hot wire table and cut the outer edges flush with my wall measurements. This time, I actually turned the heat down a little bit so that I didn't struggle with some ugly edges. And now, I paint the whole piece with black paint and Mod Podge mix. This is a pretty straightforward step that everybody's doing in their builds now, so I won't go into too much detail about that. At this point, I left the room to dry overnight. When I came back the next day, I remembered that I wanted to make a door in this room as well. I just decided to keep things simple and have a removable door on a base. For this particular door, I will be using a thin piece of foam for the door and a piece of 1mm chipboard for the base. I make sure the base and door fits into the doorway, then hot glue the pieces together. And then, after trying to draw designs into the foam with the base attached, I decided it was better to unattach the door for now, and then draw on the designs. Again, these are just random designs that I thought up on the fly. I then bend and cut pieces of paperclip to act as handles of the door. These are just U-shaped pieces that I will be adding to both sides of the door. In order to get the bend that I want, I will be using round nose pliers that are commonly used in jewelry making. And don't forget that I will have links to this sort of thing in the description down below. I then use PVA glue to attach the base and the handles to the door. Take note that I did use my blade to cut off the hot glue from the bottom of the door. I just figured that it would make the PVA glue stick a lot better. And there we have a nice little start to our door. I then attached the door to an old spray paint cap with some hot glue and painted it with that now classic mix of black paint and Mod Podge. And now to the painting. Our first coat of paint is going to be an overbrush of this gray acrylic paint. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I don't recommend this cheap Hobby Lobby paint. A cheaper and better option would be Apple Barrel Pewter Gray, which actually can be found at Walmart, or even just a mix of black and cream colored paint to get a nice warm gray. Pay attention that I'm doing an overbrush. That means that I'm wiping away just a little bit of paint before applying it to the piece. This will ensure that not too much of the paint will get into the cracks and crevices and will help pull out the details that we have carved into the foam. I then get a little squirt of Apple Barrel's khaki paint and apply it to the tiles with the runes and the section of the walls with the spiral engravings. I don't worry about overbrushing or anything like that. I just apply the paint evenly and let it get into the cracks and crevices of the sections that I'm painting. I then noticed that the black undercoating on the door had dried. So I get some Vallejo brass on my palette and paint the entire door. And for the base, I use the same gray acrylic paint that I did earlier. And I just keep both these layers of paint simple and easy. Next, I put some silver paint by Vallejo on my cardboard palette. I use a smaller brush to pick out some details on the door, like the handles and the small circular designs. I get some antique white on my palette next, and go back to painting the room. Remember that line that we did to compensate for doing an out-of-center job? Well, I paint this line a solid layer of this antique white. I really enjoyed this lighter color choice because it added just a little bit more interest to the walls. While that's drying, I went back to the metal door and did a dry brush of Vallejo silver over the whole thing. I guess I didn't wait long enough for the door to dry, as some of the silver from the previous coat rubbed off. That was easily fixed though with some quick touching up. And now back to the room. I take my antique white that is still on my palette and dry brush a highlight over the entire room. I'm doing a pretty heavy-handed dry brush this time because I don't want the room to be dark and dank looking like my previous rooms. I then dip the door in a coat of my black ink wash. This wash consists of water, black ink, and flow improver. I find that to be the ideal combination for the black ink to sink into the cracks and crevices. I also cover the entire room in that same black wash. Then leave everything to dry. I shake up my Dr. P.H. Martin's white ink and with a fine detail brush apply that ink to all the rune tiles. Partway through adding this layer, I realized that the ink was not shaken enough. Regardless, in order to keep everything uniform, I added this thin layer to all the symbols. And then after that, I added a small rock to my ink and did a better shake job. You can see in my second layer of white ink that it is a lot more opaque. I recently purchased some artist-grade golden fluid acrylics and have been extremely impressed with them. These paints are artist-quality acrylics with a high pigment ratio, and the fluid acrylic paint that Golden offers is very similar to the consistency of miniature paint. I will make sure to leave a link in the description so you can check it out. So, for the symbol color, I'm going to be using teal, and because this color is opaque, I decided to add some glazing medium to the mix. And with this first layer of detail, I'm just going to be painting a solid layer over all the white ink that should now all be dry. After covering all the symbols, I add some more glazing medium on water to the palette and mix only a few brushfuls of the teal into the mix. This will give us a nice translucent paint that will help us give a magical glow to the symbols. Now, pay attention that when applying this layer, we need to brush it on the symbol as well as around the symbol. Don't worry about coloring outside the lines, as this will help us get the glow that we're going for. I'm going to do a little time lapse for you so that you can see that I actually do more than one layer of this. I'm just brushing this translucent layer on until I'm satisfied with the amount of glow that I have. While the time lapse plays, we'll do the highlighted comment from the last video. That comment is by Alan Nolan, who said, "I love the dungeon. I'm looking around for good dungeon tile ideas because I have a lot of dungeon crawl campaign I'll be DMing in the near future. So I think this will help a lot. Thanks." Thanks a lot, Alan. Your words mean a lot to me, and I'm happy I could help out. That is one of the main reasons that I'm putting all this content out there for people. As an extra touch, I add another layer of pure white ink. Note that this is not painted over the whole symbol, but rather I add spare streaks and dots on each symbol. This will give it a bit more of a magical glow look. And then I do another super light glaze with the translucent teal mixture. This is just a quick one-over to get rid of some of the chalky look of the white, also just to touch up some of the glow. I then do a touch-up of all the black areas with black paint and a cheap paint roller. This will give the dungeon room a nice clean look. It isn't a required step, but it sure does look nice. If you want to see the whole dungeon so far, then don't forget to stay tuned until the end of the video. If you're getting some value out of my videos, consider joining me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and you will gain access to extra footage of videos like this one and videos that I've done in the past. Thanks to August McDaniel, a patron over on the Patreon page, who has shown consistent support to this channel. In appreciation of him, I am going to shout out his most recent Kickstarter, which is amazing and you really won't want to miss out on it. As I'm scripting this video, it has 350 backers and is about to meet his 4,000 stretch goal. August is an amazing sculptor who has some amazing STL files for you to 3D print. His current Kickstarter is for the fully modular buildings of Orr's Rest, which includes shops, houses, two-story buildings, stables, barns, scatter, and more. And don't forget this turtle monk, which, by the way, I will be including in a later episode of Building a Dungeon. And if you missed out on his Mushroom King Kickstarter, it is available through a second chance offer in his current Kickstarter. And that includes my Synod minis like you're seeing on the screen right now, and those things are just amazing. And now, for those glamour shots you've been waiting for. And now you can continue the journey by clicking on one of the videos that I've handpicked for you right now.